When gamers think of Nintendo, they think more of a like old school, traditional, like old mindset kind of company. And to an extent, it's very true. It's to the point where some people, make fun of Nintendo and say that they're completely stuck in the past with some of the things that they do or choose not to do. And to be fair, Nintendo is a pretty old company, founded in 1889, and it was a family company. They started making Hafunda cards, and then they branched out to like other random, experimental areas until they finally made their way over to video games. Now, when I say it was a family company, it was a family company. It was only owned by the Yamuchi family. I think that's how you pronounce it. I hope it is. Anyways, owned by them. It was, passed down from one to the other until the year 2002. From 1889 to 2002, it was always owned by a Yamuchi. He was always the owner of the company, and I think owner and CEO of the company. And for the first time ever, Nintendo is handed to an outsider. It was handed to a man named Satoru Iwata. Now, for, as traditional as a company as they are, as old-fashioned as they are, to be handed to someone that's not within the family, especially since it's a family company, you have to be pretty extraordinary. You have to be a notch above everyone else. You have to be pretty amazing. So pretty much as everyone knows, Satoru Iwata passed away a few days ago from bile duct growth, which is more or less just a rare form of cancer. It's something he was struggling with and dealing with for quite a while, and it finally got the best of him. He's been the president of Nintendo since 2002, but before that he was a programmer for Nintendo, and he's been around for pretty much like the longest, since like the mid or late 80s. He's been working for Nintendo as a programmer, and he was actually pretty good at it.
These games you see right here are just some of the games that Satoru Iwata has worked on as a programmer. So if you've had the pleasure of playing and enjoying these games, you owe some form of gratitude to Mr. Iwata. He coded Earthbound entirely by himself. He made Pokemon Stadium in his free time, and some of the higher ups saw it and got it approved to be an actual game. He worked on Gold and Silver. He was able to compress the files enough to where they were able to fit both the Johto and the Kanto regions onto the game. He also played a major role in getting Melee released on time as far as the debugging goes. He did pretty much most of that, quite a lot by himself. So he's a very big reason why that got released when it did and why the game turned out the way it did.
I actually have a lot of memories from some of these games that he's helped make. I remember the first time I ever stayed up past midnight was actually playing the first Pokemon Stadium on the Nintendo 64. I was at my dad's friend's or girlfriend's house, whatever she was, and she's like, my son, he's out for the night. He has a Nintendo 64. You can go ahead and play on it. I was like, oh, cool. So I went over there and I was digging through the games, and I saw Pokemon Stadium, and I was playing that. And I remember looking at the clock. It was around 12:03, and I remember I had a Zapdos out during the Gym Leader Challenge. I don't know why that memory sticks out, but it does. I also remember pouring in countless hours into Melee, nothing like serious, but just fun that I've had with friends of mine. And I don't think I've ever put this story on YouTube before, but for me, I didn't really become a gamer until I got my hands on Pokemon Red version one summer. Now, before Pokemon Red version, I've definitely played video games before. I enjoyed them. I've played the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, and Genesis. Like, I've played all these things. I really like them. I just didn't have anything of my own, and I didn't really get, like, sucked in until one summer when I'm over at my grandma's house, all the way out in Washington State, which is extremely far because I have lived on the East Coast for most of my life. So I'm out there visiting my grandmother. She loved to spoil me, and she loved to buy me things, which is great because the whole reason I didn't have video games up until this point was because my dad just didn't like the idea. He was a very strict guy, did not want me to have anything like that. So I'm out there visiting her, and we're walking around Costco because she wanted to make sure I had all the food that I wanted to eat, like all the stuff I liked. She just really loved to spoil me back then. So we're walking down this one aisle, and I guess she caught me like with the wide-eyed kid staring at a little bundle of a purple Game Boy Color and Pokemon Red version. So Grandma sees me looking at it, and she grabs it, and she goes, "Do you want this?" And kids say basically whatever's on their mind, and I said, "Yes, I really do, but there's no way my dad would let me have that, Grandma." And her, being my grandmother, she goes, "Well, we'll go ahead and get it, and if your dad has a problem with it, he can talk to me." So that's where it all began for me, right there with that Game Boy and Pokemon Red version. I loved that game. I played it for hours and hours on end, to the point where I actually got in trouble for playing it so much. But it was amazing. I loved it, and when I went to school, it gave me something to socialize with, something to talk about, and then, of course, trading Pokemon and battling. It was a blast. It was a very big part of my childhood. So fast forward a couple years later, Pokemon Gold and Silver come out, and they take everything I love about Red and Blue and just completely amplify it. There was the new Johto region. There were new Pokemon. The graphics looked so much better. There was the clock, so there had a day-night system. There was a weekday system. Some events only happened during certain days at certain times. There was the friendship evolution. There was the fact that you could breed your Pokemon, so you didn't have to, just only get one starter and then try to convince your friends to trade theirs or anything like that. No, you could just breed it and then trade those. There was the special split, because in Red and Blue it was just a special stat, but in Gold and Silver they split it to special attack and special defense. They introduced the Dark and Steel types, which was like the first time we got new Pokemon types, and it didn't happen again for like a long time. There was the cell phone, so you could get people's numbers and call them for room matches, or sometimes they just call you. Your mom would just go out and like randomly buy you stuff. You could decorate your room. And then, of course, after you beat the Elite Four, you could travel back to the Kanto region, which was all possible to Satoru Iwata, who was able to compress the game enough, compress the files enough to where they were able to add the Kanto region. So it was the first, and to this day, the only games where you could travel between two regions and collect 16 badges. At the time, it was just completely mind-blowing, and it was the first time I was like completely engrossed in a video game. It didn't just feel like a game. Like the game itself felt alive because of all these features. It felt like there was a real living world within this game, and I never experienced anything like that before I played Gold and Silver, and it was at that point where I guess I became like a true gamer, because before that I enjoyed video games, and then I got Red version, which made me kind of into a gamer, but when I got Gold version, I fell in love with video games. So fast forward a couple more years, it's summer of 2004, I believe. I'm out visiting my grandmother, and at this point my cousins live with her because of reasons. And I'm like, "Yo, cuz, what's going on?" We kind of had this tradition where we would play Super Nintendo. We'd play Super Mario World, Donkey Kong Country, Mortal Kombat, all the Super Nintendo games that we had, or he had, I should say. So I'm out there. I was like, "Hey, cuz, yo, man, it's been a hot minute. Let's fire up the Super Nintendo, man. Let's do that." My cousin kind of hangs his head and says, "Sorry, cuz, we can't do that anymore." "What are you talking about, cuz? Can't do that anymore?" He looks at me and says, "Yeah, Grandpa got rid of the Super Nintendo, and we got a PlayStation 2 now." And I was just sitting there like, "Yo, cuz, this isn't funny. Let's play Super Nintendo." He goes, "No, I'm being serious. They got rid of it." And I swear, no joke, this went back and forth for like 15 minutes before it actually hit me that he was being honest, and we didn't have a Super Nintendo to play with anymore. We had a PlayStation 2. I remember I got pretty mad. I was like, "What the hell?" I was like, "Why'd they get a PlayStation 2?" It was like, why'd they get rid of the Super Nintendo? We love that thing. Like, the thing's the best. It's the greatest. And my cousin goes, "Yeah." And I was like, "Dude, if you could trade in this PlayStation 2 for a Super Nintendo, would you do it?" He goes like, "Hell yeah, I'd do it." So as we're sitting there kind of like mourning over the loss of the Super Nintendo, we go online and we just look up Nintendo related things, and that's when we saw Satoru Iwata, who um, recently became the president of Nintendo. Actually, no, I guess at that point he was president for a couple years, but it was news to us at the time. So we come across that, president of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, and his picture shows up on Google. I looked at the picture and I said, yo, this guy kind of looks like a dork. My cousin looked at the picture, didn't even take his eyes off it. He says, cuz that's the coolest guy in the world. Now, while all of that is very subjective and an opinion, over the years, Iwata really grew on me, so I guess in retrospect, I agree with him now. I mean, Iwata has done so much for gaming, and it's not because, he did it for a paycheck. It's something he really enjoyed doing. He didn't go out and do all those, like, feats I mentioned earlier just because, he had to or someone told him to. He did it because he wanted to. He wanted to do these things to, like, make games come out or improve them, make them as good as possible. And then even though when he became president of Nintendo he made some of these decisions I didn't completely agree with or agree with at all, his heart was still in the right place. He was still just trying to do what was best in his mind. And you could tell during the Nintendo Directs that he really loved his job. He loved gaming and what he did. And, he wasn't, like a typical CEO that was a CEO just to be a CEO just running a business. You could tell that he really was a gamer and he truly loved this. He wouldn't be serious all the time, or you know what? I think about it now, maybe he wasn't really serious at all. He was just very lighthearted and funny. And in the Nintendo Directs, he definitely had fun with it. He even poked fun at himself with some of the directs. So it was definitely a really cool guy. It's pretty crazy to look back at all the things he's done and how they've just how they just added up, and really how much this man has affected my life. And it's pretty sad how I didn't even sit down and think about all that until he passed away. So, Mr. Iwata, I hope somehow that this message gets sent directly to you so you will understand not only how much you meant to the gaming industry and Nintendo, but how much you have affected fans such as myself and others across the world. Iwata-san, arigato.